The golden African sun was beginning its descent behind the sprawling cityscape of Ouagadougou, casting long shadows across the bustling streets. In the heart of the city's diplomatic quarter, a convoy of black armored vehicles moved with practiced precision through the evening traffic. At the center of this mobile fortress sat President Ibrahim Traoré, a man who had clawed his way to power through revolution, determination, and an unwavering belief in his country's potential. The Phantom 10X that carried him was no ordinary vehicle. Manufactured in Germany specifically for high-risk political figures, it weighed nearly 8 tons and could withstand direct hits from rocket-propelled grenades. Its windows were 4 inches of bulletproof glass, and its frame was reinforced with titanium plating. The interior was a study in controlled luxury. Leather seats that could recline into medical beds, communications equipment that could reach any corner of the globe, and an independent air filtration system that could protect against chemical attacks. Ibrahim had insisted on this level of security after the 3rd assassination attempt on his life in 18 months. Each attack had been more sophisticated than the last, and each had taught him that in the modern world of African politics, paranoia wasn't a weakness. It was a survival skill. "Mr. President," came the voice of his personal aide through the intercom. "The ministers are waiting for your arrival at the palace. The economic summit documents require your review before tomorrow's presentation to the African Union delegation." Ibrahim nodded absently, his fingers drumming against the mahogany armrest. Through the tinted windows, he watched the familiar sights of his capital city unfold. Street vendors hawked their wares under colorful umbrellas. Young men on motorcycles weaved through traffic with death-defying skill, and children played soccer in small clearings between buildings. This was the Burkina Faso he was fighting to protect and modernize, a nation rich in culture and potential, but plagued by poverty and political instability. Across from him sat Colonel Mamadou Amadou, his chief of security and one of the few men he trusted completely. Amadou was a battle-hardened veteran who had served in 3 different African conflicts before joining Ibrahim's revolutionary movement. His weathered face bore the scars of shrapnel from a rebel ambush in the northern provinces, and his eyes held the constant vigilance of a man who had seen too much treachery to ever fully relax. "Sir," Amadou said, glancing at his tablet, "I've reviewed the security protocols for tonight's route. We have aerial surveillance from 2 drones, counter-sniper teams positioned at 3 key intersections, and backup medical units stationed every 2 kilometers along our path." Ibrahim appreciated Amadou's thoroughness, but something still felt wrong. It was an instinct he had developed during his years as a revolutionary leader, a 6th sense that had saved his life more times than he could count. The feeling was like a cold weight in his stomach, a persistent whisper that danger was approaching from an unexpected direction. "Tell me about the driver," Ibrahim said suddenly. Amadou looked surprised. "Sergeant Ousmane? He's been with the security detail for 8 months. Former military police, excellent driving record, clean background check. Why do you ask? Has he seemed different lately? Nervous? Distracted?" Amadou considered this. "Now that you mention it, he has been quieter than usual. But that could be anything. Family problems, financial stress. Many of our men are dealing with personal issues." Ibrahim nodded, but the uneasy feeling persisted. In his experience, when something felt wrong, it usually was wrong. The question was whether he would recognize the threat in time to act on it. The radio crackled to life with the driver's voice. "Mr. President, we're approaching the intersection near the Central Market. Traffic is heavier than expected due to a minor accident. I recommend we take the alternate route through Avenue Koumassi. It will add only 5 minutes to our journey, but avoid the congestion." Ibrahim frowned. Avenue Koumassi wasn't part of their planned route, and deviation from security protocols always carried risks. But the driver's suggestion seemed logical, and Ibrahim had learned to trust his team's tactical judgments. "What do you think?" he asked Amadou. The colonel consulted his map and radio. "Koumassi is a quieter residential area, Fewer people, better. Sightlines for our Overwatch teams. It's actually a more secure route than the main thoroughfare. Very well, Ibrahim decided. Take Avenue Kumasi. As the convoy turned onto the tree-lined avenue, Ibrahim felt a moment of relief. The street was indeed quieter. Spacious homes with well-maintained gardens, elderly residents sitting on porches, children walking home from school. It seemed like the kind of peaceful neighborhood where danger was the last thing anyone would expect. But in the world of modern warfare and political assassination, the unexpected was exactly where danger liked to hide. The ambush came with the sudden violence of a thunderclap. One moment, Ibrahim was reviewing economic reports in the peaceful quiet of his armored sanctuary. The next, the world exploded around him in a symphony of destruction that would haunt his dreams for years to come. The first explosion erupted behind the convoy with a force that shattered windows 3 blocks away. An improvised explosive device, buried weeks earlier beneath what appeared to be routine road maintenance, sent a pillar of fire and debris high into the evening sky. The blast was timed not to destroy the presidential vehicle. The Phantom 10X was built to survive such attacks, but to trap it, to funnel it toward the real killing ground that lay ahead. The shockwave hit their vehicle like the fist of an angry god. Inside the Phantom, Ibrahim was hurled sideways with such force that his shoulder struck the armored wall, sending lightning bolts of pain down his left arm. Documents scattered across the cabin like confetti, and the overhead lights flickered. Ominously, "Contact! Contact!" Amadou shouted into his radio, his training taking over even as he fought to remain upright. "Convoy under attack! We need immediate extraction and medical support!" But the explosion was only the beginning. Before the echo of the blast faded, the systematic gunfire began. This wasn't the wild, undisciplined shooting of angry rebels or street criminals. These were precision rifle shots, fired from elevated positions by marksmen who knew exactly where to aim for maximum psychological impact. The bullets struck the Phantom's armored exterior in a calculated rhythm, not randomly, but in patterns designed to create maximum stress fractures in the bulletproof glass. "Professional marksmen," Amadou observed grimly, watching the spiderweb cracks spread across the windshield. "Military-grade weapons, coordinated fire. This isn't a local operation." Ibrahim struggled to focus through the pain radiating from his injured shoulder. His mind, trained by years of combat and political survival, was already analyzing the situation with cold clarity. The timing was too perfect, the location too precisely chosen, the execution too flawless. "Sir, are you injured?" Amadou asked, noting the president's grimace of pain. "I'll survive," Ibrahim replied through gritted teeth. "But tell me, how did they know we would be on this exact street at this exact time?" The question hung in the air like smoke from the explosion. Their route had been classified, known only to a handful of trusted individuals. The last-minute change to Avenue Kumasi had been made just minutes earlier, hardly enough time for hostile forces to reposition unless they had been expecting it all along. Ibrahim's eyes moved to the front of the vehicle, where Sergeant Ousmane sat rigidly behind the wheel, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. The driver's breathing was rapid and shallow, but not from fear, from anticipation, from the adrenaline rush of a man whose carefully laid plans were finally coming to fruition. "Drive!" Amadou commanded. "Get us out of here!" The Phantom lurched forward, its powerful engine roaring as it accelerated down the tree-lined avenue. Behind them, the rest of the convoy followed, weaving between burning debris and shattered glass. But even as they fled, Ibrahim couldn't shake the feeling that they were running deeper into the trap rather than escaping from it. More gunfire erupted from rooftops and upper-story windows. The attackers had clearly spent weeks preparing this ambush, positioning themselves at multiple vantage points along what they knew would be the president's escape route. Every turn, every possible direction of flight had been anticipated and covered. "There!" Amadou pointed to a muzzle flash from a building to their right. "Sniper position, second floor!" The military escort vehicles immediately returned fire, their mounted machine guns raking the building's facade with devastating accuracy. But for every sniper position they neutralized, another seemed to open up somewhere else. The enemy wasn't just well-positioned, they were numerous. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the gunfire stopped. In the abrupt silence that followed, Ibrahim could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. The Phantom continued its high-speed escape, weaving through narrow residential streets as Ousmane navigated toward what should have been safety. But Ibrahim's instincts were screaming that something was wrong. "Why did they stop shooting?" he asked aloud. Amadou was thinking the same thing. "Either we've moved out of their kill zone or they've accomplished their primary objective," Ibrahim finished grimly. It was then that Sergeant Ousmane suddenly slumped forward over the steering wheel, his hands falling limp at his sides. A thin trickle of blood appeared at his hairline, and he groaned softly as if coming out of unconsciousness. "He's hit!" someone shouted over the radio from one of the trailing vehicles. "The driver's been wounded!" The convoy immediately pulled to a stop. Within seconds, a medic from the rear support vehicle was sprinting forward, his medical bag bouncing as he ran. The man moved with practiced efficiency, yanking open the driver's door and quickly assessing Ousmane's condition. "Superficial head wound," the medic announced. "Probably debris from the explosion. He needs immediate medical attention, but he should be fine." In the chaos and adrenaline of the moment, no one questioned the medic's assessment. No one noticed that the wound was remarkably clean for debris, damage, or that Ousmane's unconsciousness had come at remarkably convenient timing. In less than 2 minutes, the driver was loaded onto a stretcher and transferred to the medical support vehicle. "I'll take over driving," announced one of the security team members, sliding behind the wheel of the Phantom. As the convoy resumed its journey to safety, Ibrahim sat back in his seat, his shoulder throbbing but his mind crystal clear. In the space of 10 minutes, everything had changed. The attack had been too sophisticated, too well coordinated to be the work of local rebels or criminal gangs. This was the signature of international mercenaries, professionals who sold violence to the highest bidder. But more disturbing than the attack itself was what it revealed about the security around him. Someone with intimate knowledge of his movements, his protocols, his backup plans had betrayed that information to the enemy. The attack hadn't just been an attempt on his life, it had been a message. A demonstration that nowhere was safe, that no one could be trusted, that even his most secure fortress could be penetrated. By the time they reached the military compound that served as the backup presidential bunker, both Sergeant Ousmane and the medic who had treated him had vanished into the night, leaving behind only questions and the terrible realization that the enemy wasn't just outside the gates. The enemy was already inside. The secure medical facility at the military compound was a stark contrast to the chaos they had just escaped. Clean white walls, the steady beeping of monitoring equipment, and the antiseptic smell of a modern hospital created an atmosphere of clinical calm. But as Ibrahim lay on the examination table while doctors checked his injuries, his mind was anything but calm. Dr. Sarah Kabore, the base's chief medical officer, finished her examination with professional efficiency. "You have a separated shoulder and significant bruising across your chest and ribs," she announced. "No internal bleeding, no concussion, but you'll be in considerable pain for the next few weeks. I'm prescribing pain medication and recommending at least 3 days of bed rest." "3 days I don't have," Ibrahim replied, wincing as he attempted to sit up. "My country is under attack by forces we don't yet understand. I can't afford to be confined to a hospital bed." Dr. Kabore's expression was stern. "Mr. President, with respect, you can't protect your country if you collapse from exhaustion or re-injure yourself. Your body has been through significant trauma. You need time to heal." But even as she spoke, Ibrahim could see Colonel Amadou approaching through the glass doors of the medical bay, carrying a thick manila folder that undoubtedly contained preliminary intelligence reports about the attack. The real work, the hunt for answers, was just beginning. "Give me something for the pain," Ibrahim decided, "but I won't be staying in bed. There's too much at stake." Once he was alone with Amadou, the facade of presidential composure finally cracked. "Tell me you have good news," Ibrahim said quietly. Amadou's expression was grim as he opened the folder. "I'm afraid not, sir. The attack was even more sophisticated than we initially thought. Our forensics team found evidence of at least 6 different sniper positions, all equipped with military-grade rifles and thermal imaging scopes. The explosives were professional-grade, probably Semtex or C4, with electronic timers that were synchronized to the second." He pulled out a series of photographs showing the aftermath of the ambush. The street looked like a war zone. Twisted, metal, shattered glass, and burn marks that would remain visible for months to come. "But here's the most troubling part," Amadou continued. "We found this at one of the sniper positions." He handed Ibrahim a small device about the size of a matchbook. It looked innocuous enough, black plastic with a few LED lights, but Ibrahim recognized it immediately. "A GPS tracker," he said. "Specifically, a tracker synchronized to the GPS system in your vehicle. Whoever planted this knew not just your general route, but your exact position at all times. They could track your movements in real time and coordinate their attack accordingly." The implications were staggering. The GPS system in the presidential vehicle was supposed to be encrypted and secure, accessible only to the highest levels of the security apparatus. Someone with extraordinary access had compromised it. "What about Sergeant Ousmane and the medic?" Ibrahim asked, though he already suspected the answer. "Gone," Amadou confirmed. "We searched their quarters, their lockers, their personal effects. Ousmane's apartment was cleaned out. No personal belongings, no family photographs, nothing. It's as if he never lived there." "And the medic?" "We're still investigating, but preliminary reports suggest that the man who treated Ousmane wasn't actually part of our medical team. He had the right uniform, the right identification, but none of our personnel remember authorizing his presence." Ibrahim felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "So Ousmane's injury was staged?" "It appears so. The head wound was likely self-inflicted or created with makeup. The entire scene was designed to provide cover for his escape." "Which means the attack served 2 purposes," Ibrahim realized. "To eliminate me, and if that failed, to extract their inside asset before we could interrogate him." Amadou nodded grimly. "We've been compromised at the highest levels, sir. And I suspect Ousmane was just the tip of the iceberg." Over the next several hours, as Ibrahim fought through waves of pain from his injuries, a disturbing picture began to emerge. The attack on Avenue Kumasi hadn't been an isolated incident. It was part of a larger, more sophisticated operation that had been planned for months, possibly years. Intelligence reports from across West Africa revealed a pattern of similar attacks on government officials, military leaders, and business executives. In each case, the operations bore the hallmarks of professional mercenaries working with inside information. In each case, key individuals had mysteriously disappeared or died in apparent accidents shortly before or after the attacks. "We're looking at a coordinated destabilization campaign," Amadou explained as they reviewed the intelligence files. "Someone is systematically targeting the leadership structure of multiple African nations, not to conquer territory, but to create chaos and instability." "But who would benefit from such chaos?" Ibrahim asked. The answer came in the form of a single encrypted file that had been discovered buried deep in the communication logs of Ousmane's personal computer. It had taken their best cyber warfare specialists 6 hours to crack the encryption, but the message inside was devastatingly clear. Phase 1 complete. Asset extracted successfully. Target eliminated or neutralized. Phase 2 can proceed as scheduled. Financial compensation has been transferred to the usual accounts. The organization appreciates your continued cooperation, KD. The initials at the bottom of the message sent a chill down Ibrahim's spine. KD. Karamoko Diarra, a name he hadn't heard in over 3 years, but one that still haunted his dreams. Diarra had once been a trusted political advisor, a man who had helped Ibrahim navigate the complex world of international diplomacy during the early days of his presidency. He was brilliant, charming, and utterly ruthless in his pursuit of what he claimed was the greater good. But gradually, Ibrahim had come to realize that Diarra's vision of the greater good involved the systematic dismantling of African sovereignty in favor of a new form of colonial control, one operated not by European governments, but by multinational corporations and private military contractors. When Ibrahim had refused to sign several lucrative but exploitative mining contracts that Diarra had negotiated, the advisor had disappeared overnight, taking with him several classified documents and a substantial amount of money from government accounts. At the time, Ibrahim had assumed Diarra was simply another corrupt official who had fled when his schemes were discovered. Now it appeared that Diarra hadn't fled at all. He had simply moved to a different battlefield. "Sir," Amadou said quietly, "there's something else you need to see." He pulled out another file, this one containing financial records that had been painstakingly reconstructed from fragments found on Ousmane's hard drive. The records showed a complex network of shell companies, offshore bank accounts, and cryptocurrency transactions that traced back to a single source, a private military corporation called Sahel Solutions, headquartered in Dubai, but operating across Africa and the Middle East. Sahel Solutions is run by former intelligence officers from several Western nations, Amadou explained. They specialize in what they call political risk management. Essentially, they destabilize governments that don't cooperate with their clients' business interests. And their clients? Mining companies, oil corporations, agricultural conglomerates, any organization that wants to extract resources from African nations without dealing with inconvenient regulations or democratic processes. Ibrahim stared at the financial records, feeling a cold fury building in his chest. This wasn't just about him, or even about Burkina Faso. This was about the systematic exploitation of an entire continent, carried out by people who viewed African lives as nothing more than obstacles to profit. "How long has this been going on?" he asked. "Based on these records, at least 5 years. Possibly longer. They've been building networks of assets, compromising security services, and positioning themselves for a coordinated campaign across multiple countries. And now they're ready to move to the next phase." "It appears so, sir." Ibrahim closed the file and leaned back in his chair, ignoring the pain that shot through his shoulder. Outside the secure facility, night had fallen over Ouagadougou, and the city lights twinkled like stars scattered across the darkness. Somewhere out there, in the shadows between those lights, Karamoko Diarra and his network of mercenaries and traitors were preparing for the next phase of their campaign. But they had made one critical error. They had underestimated Ibrahim Traoré's capacity for survival and his determination to protect his people. "Colonel," Ibrahim said quietly, "I want you to assemble a team, small, tight, composed only of people whose loyalty is beyond question. We're going to hunt down every member of this network, starting with the man who used to be my advisor. Sir, with respect, you're injured and they'll be expecting retaliation. Perhaps we should coordinate with international law enforcement or—" "No," Ibrahim interrupted. "This is our fight, our country, our people, our sovereignty. We handle it ourselves." Amadou nodded slowly. He had served under Ibrahim long enough to recognize that tone of voice, the quiet, implacable determination that had carried them through revolution and civil war. "What about General Yago?" Amadou asked. "He's been asking to meet with you about security protocols." For a moment, Ibrahim didn't respond. General Boubacar Yago was one of his oldest allies, a man who had fought beside him during the darkest days of the revolution. If anyone could be trusted with the sensitive intelligence they had uncovered, it would be Yago. But then again, that's exactly what he had thought about Sergeant Ousmane and dozens of other people who had betrayed that trust. Set up the meeting, Ibrahim decided. But keep it small and secure. If there are any other traitors in our inner circle, I want to identify them before they can do any more damage. As Amadou left to make the arrangements, Ibrahim remained alone in the sterile white room, staring at the intelligence files that revealed the true scope of the threat facing his nation. The attack on Avenue Kumasi had been traumatic, but it was also clarifying. It had stripped away his illusions about safety and security, forcing him to confront a harsh truth that many African leaders preferred to ignore. In the modern world, the greatest threats to African sovereignty didn't come from traditional armies or colonial governments. They came from shadowy networks of corporations, mercenaries, and corrupted officials who operated in the gray spaces between nations, accountable to no law except profit. But as Ibrahim had learned during his years as a revolutionary, the most dangerous enemies were often those who underestimated the power of a determined people fighting for their freedom. Karamoko Diarra and his network had revealed themselves, which meant they could be hunted, and Ibrahim Traoré had become very good at hunting his enemies. The meeting with General Yago was scheduled for midnight at a safe house in the diplomatic quarter, a nondescript building that officially served as a cultural center but had been secretly converted into a secure facility for sensitive government meetings. Ibrahim arrived with only a small security detail, his injured shoulder still causing him considerable pain despite the medication. General Boubacar Yago was already waiting when Ibrahim entered the Spartan conference room. At 62, Yago was an imposing figure, tall and broad-shouldered, with graying hair and the bearing of a man who had spent his life in command of others. He had been one of the first military officers to join Ibrahim's revolutionary movement, and his tactical brilliance had been instrumental in their eventual victory. But as Ibrahim looked at his old friend and comrade, he found himself seeing Yago through new eyes. The general's posture was too rigid, his expression too controlled. There was something in his eyes, a calculation, a distance, that hadn't been there in the old days when they had shared foxholes and dreamed of a free Burkina Faso. "Ibrahim," Yago said, rising from his chair, "I was horrified to hear about the attack. Thank God you survived." "Thanks to good intelligence and better armor," Ibrahim replied carefully, "though we lost several good people in the process." "Indeed. I've been reviewing the security protocols with Colonel Amadou. We clearly have gaps in our defensive perimeter that need to be addressed immediately." Ibrahim took a seat across from Yago, noting how the general's eyes seemed to avoid direct contact. "What's your assessment of the threat level?" "Significant but manageable," Yago replied. "Probably foreign-backed rebels or criminal organizations looking to destabilize the government for ransom or political concessions. We've seen similar patterns in Mali and Niger. It was a reasonable analysis, the kind of conventional wisdom that military academies taught and intelligence services accepted. But Ibrahim had learned to look beyond the conventional, especially when dealing with unconventional enemies. "What if it wasn't rebels or criminals?" Ibrahim asked quietly. "What if it was something more sophisticated, something with inside knowledge of our movements and protocols?" For just a moment, Yago's composed facade flickered. A muscle in his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and his hands briefly clenched before relaxing again. It was a micro-expression that most people would have missed, but Ibrahim had spent years reading the faces of allies and enemies in high-stakes situations. "I suppose that's possible," Yago said carefully, "though it would require a level of penetration that seems unlikely." "Would it?" "We've discovered that Sergeant Ousmane, the driver, was working with the attackers. He had access to classified route information and real-time GPS coordinates." "Ousmane." Yago looked genuinely surprised. But he passed all security screenings. His background was clean. Backgrounds can be fabricated. Loyalties can be bought. The question is, who had the resources and connections to plant an asset so deep in our security apparatus? Yago was quiet for a long moment, seemingly lost in thought. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with what sounded like genuine regret. Ibrahim, there's something I need to tell you. Something I probably should have mentioned earlier. Ibrahim felt his pulse quicken, but he kept his expression neutral. I'm listening. About 6 months ago, I was approached by someone claiming to represent a private security consulting firm. They said they had intelligence about threats to regional stability and wanted to establish a dialogue with key African military leaders. What kind of intelligence? Reports about foreign weapons shipments, radical groups receiving funding, that sort of thing. Nothing that seemed immediately threatening, but concerning enough that I felt obligated to listen. Ibrahim leaned forward slightly. And who was this someone? Yago hesitated, and in that hesitation, Ibrahim saw something that chilled him to the bone, not surprise or confusion, but calculation. The general was deciding how much truth to reveal and how much to conceal. The contact identified himself as a representative of Sahel Solutions, Yago finally said. A man named, I believe it was Karamoko something. He claimed to be a former government advisor with extensive knowledge of regional politics. The room fell silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning system. Ibrahim felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. Not only did Yago know about Karamoko Diarra and Sahel Solutions, he had been in active communication with them for months. And what was the nature of these communications? Ibrahim asked, his voice deadly quiet. Nothing treasonous, I assure. You, Yago said quickly. Just information sharing, discussions about regional security challenges. They offered to provide intelligence reports in exchange for general assessments of political stability. General assessments, such as presidential travel schedules, security protocols, the loyalty of key personnel. Yago's face had gone pale. Ibrahim, you can't possibly think that What I think, Ibrahim interrupted, is that you've been manipulated by people far more sophisticated than you realized. The question is whether it was manipulation or collaboration. How can you even ask that? Yago stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. I've served this country for 40 years. I fought beside you when no one else believed in our cause. I've sacrificed everything for Burkina Faso. And yet, you've been sharing sensitive information with foreign mercenaries for months without informing me or anyone else in the government. I was trying to protect you. The intelligence they provided helped us prevent 2 other attacks that you never even knew about. Ibrahim studied his old friend's face, looking for any sign of deception. What he saw instead was something even more troubling, genuine belief. Yago actually thought he had been protecting the country by collaborating with its enemies. Boubacar, Ibrahim said gently, using the general's first name for the first time in years, show me these intelligence reports. Show me evidence of the attacks they helped us prevent. Yago hesitated again, and Ibrahim knew with sinking certainty that there were no such reports. The intelligence had been carefully crafted misinformation designed to make Yago feel valuable and important, while gradually extracting real secrets from him. The reports were classified. I didn't keep copies. Of course you didn't. Ibrahim stood slowly, his shoulder protesting the movement. Because they never existed. You were played, Boubacar, used by experts who knew exactly how to appeal to your patriotism and your ego. That's not, I would never. Yago's voice trailed off as the full scope of his manipulation became clear even to him. How much did they pay you? Ibrahim asked quietly. Pay me? They never. Yago stopped, his face crumbling as realization hit him. Oh, God, the consulting fees. They said it was standard compensation for my time and expertise. How much? 200,000 euros over 6 months. But Ibrahim, I swear I didn't know. You didn't know because you didn't want to know. You wanted to believe that foreign mercenaries had approached you out of respect for your military expertise, not because they saw you as a useful idiot to be exploited. The words were harsh but necessary. Ibrahim had learned that in dealing with betrayal, whether intentional or accidental, brutal honesty was the only path to understanding and potentially redemption. "What do you want me to do?" Iago asked, quietly, all his military bearing having drained away. "I want you to help us destroy them," Ibrahim replied. "All of them, Diara, Sahel Solutions, and every other mercenary and traitor involved in this conspiracy." "How?" "By giving them exactly what they expect from you. Continued cooperation and access. But this time, you'll be working for me, not them." Iago straightened slightly, a glimmer of hope appearing in his eyes. "You'd trust me with that kind of operation?" "I'd trust you to try to redeem yourself," Ibrahim corrected. "But understand this. If you betray me again, if you give me even the slightest reason to doubt your commitment, I will have you shot as a traitor. Not arrested, not court-martialed, shot. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir." "Good. Then here's what we're going to do." Over the next 2 hours, Ibrahim and Iago planned what would become known in intelligence circles as Operation Cleansing Wind, a counterintelligence campaign designed to use the enemy's own networks against them. Iago would continue his communications with Sahel Solutions, but every piece of information he provided would be carefully crafted disinformation designed to expose other assets and operatives. Meanwhile, Ibrahim would use the intelligence they had gathered from Ousmane's files to begin systematically dismantling Diara's network across West Africa. It would be dangerous, requiring them to operate in the shadows without the support of traditional law enforcement or international agencies. But it was also necessary. The attack on Avenue Kumasi had been a declaration of war against African sovereignty itself. And Ibrahim Traoré had never backed down from a fight, especially when the freedom of his people was at stake. As the meeting concluded, Iago paused at the door. "Ibrahim, I want you to know that I never intended—" "I know," Ibrahim interrupted, "but intentions don't matter anymore. Only results do. Help me destroy these people, and we'll consider your debt paid." After Iago left, Ibrahim remained alone. In the conference room, staring at the detailed maps and intelligence reports spread across the table. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. Tentacles reaching into governments, military forces, and business organizations across a dozen African nations. But for the first time since the attack, Ibrahim felt a glimmer of hope. They had identified the enemy, understood their methods, and begun to turn their own weapons against them. The shadow war that had been waged against Africa for years was about to become a very different kind of conflict. The hunters were about to become the hunted. Dawn broke over Ouagadougou with the promise of searing heat and the weight of momentous decisions. In a secure bunker beneath the presidential palace, Ibrahim Traoré stood before a large digital map that displayed the known locations of Sahel Solutions operatives across West Africa. Red dots marked confirmed positions, yellow dots indicated suspected sites, and blue lines traced the financial networks that connected them all. Colonel Amadou entered the room carrying 2 cups of strong coffee and a manila folder thick with overnight intelligence reports. "The cyber warfare team has made significant progress," he announced. "They've cracked 3 more encrypted communication channels and identified at least 12 additional assets in the network." Ibrahim accepted the coffee gratefully. Despite the pain medication, his shoulder throbbed constantly, and he had managed only 2 hours of restless sleep. But physical discomfort was irrelevant when weighed against what they had discovered. "What? About the financial trail?" he asked. "Even more revealing than we hoped. Sahel Solutions isn't just a private military company. It's the operational arm of a much larger consortium. Mining rights, oil concessions, agricultural projects. There are billions of dollars at stake across multiple countries. Amadou opened the folder and pulled out a series of photographs showing various African leaders at international conferences and diplomatic events. Look at this pattern. Every government official targeted for assassination or destabilization in the past 3 years had one thing in common. They had either refused to sign exploitative resource extraction agreements or were working to renegotiate existing contracts in favor of their own people. Ibrahim studied the photographs, recognizing several faces. President Coulibaly of Côte d'Ivoire, who had been killed in what was reported as a helicopter accident but now appeared to have been sabotage. General Sankara of Mali, who had died in a supposed rebel ambush while traveling to negotiations with French mining companies. Minister Diallo of Guinea, whose car had exploded due to what investigators claimed was a mechanical failure. They're not just destabilizing governments, Ibrahim realized. They're systematically eliminating anyone who stands in the way of resource exploitation and replacing them with leaders who are more cooperative, Amadou added grimly. We've identified at least 6 cases where mysterious accidents or attacks were followed within months by new governments signing extremely favorable contracts with Western corporations. The scope of the conspiracy was breathtaking. It wasn't just about Burkina Faso or even West Africa. It was a systematic campaign to recolonize the entire continent through violence, corruption, and economic coercion. Sir, Amadou continued, there's something else. General Yago made contact with his Sahel Solutions handler last night as planned. He requested an urgent meeting, claiming to have critical intelligence about your security arrangements. And they took the bait. The meeting is scheduled for tonight at a warehouse complex in the industrial district. According to the intercepts, they're sending someone significant, possibly Diarra himself. Ibrahim felt a cold smile cross his face. After years of hiding in the shadows, his former advisor was finally ready to step into the light. It was an opportunity they couldn't afford to miss. What about backup? If this is a trap, it almost certainly is, Amadou agreed. But we'll be ready. I've positioned 3 teams of our most trusted operatives around the warehouse complex. Sniper overwatch, electronic surveillance, and rapid response units. If Diarra shows up, he won't leave. And if he doesn't? Then we capture whoever they do send and extract everything they know about the network's structure and operations. Ibrahim nodded, but his mind was already moving beyond the immediate tactical situation. Even if they succeeded in capturing or eliminating Diarra, Sahel Solutions was just one arm of a much larger organization. Cutting off the head might slow them down, but it wouldn't destroy them entirely. Colonel, I want you to prepare for a broader operation. We're not just going after Diarra, we're going to dismantle the entire network. Sir, with respect, that's beyond our current capabilities. We're talking about operations across multiple countries, possibly involving hundreds of operatives and billions of dollars in resources. Then we expand our capabilities, Ibrahim replied firmly. Contact President Keita in Mali, President Ouattara in Côte d'Ivoire, and Prime Minister Condé in Guinea. Share our intelligence with them. If I'm right, they've all been targeted by this same network. You want to create a multinational task force? I want to create an alliance. African solutions to African problems. We've relied on foreign powers for security assistance for too long. It's time we learn to protect ourselves. As Amadou left to make the necessary contacts, Ibrahim turned his attention to the most sensitive aspect of their operation. The personal dimension of his conflict with Karamoko Diarra. Their relationship had begun with such promise, built on shared dreams of African development and independence. But somewhere along the way, those dreams had diverged into fundamentally incompatible visions of the future. Ibrahim believed in sovereignty, democracy, and the right of African peoples to control their own resources and destinies. Diarra, it seemed, believed in efficiency, profit, and the necessity of strong leadership, even if that leadership came at the barrel of a gun and served foreign interests. The tragedy was that both men were brilliant, both were charismatic, and both genuinely believed they were working for the betterment of Africa. The difference was in their definition of betterment and their willingness to sacrifice principles for pragmatic results. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Dr. Traoré entered the room, her medical bag in one hand and a stern expression on her face. "Mr. President, you missed your scheduled checkup this morning, and Colonel Amadou tells me you're planning some kind of field operation tonight. I cannot allow you to engage in dangerous activities while you're still recovering from significant trauma." Ibrahim sighed. "Doctor, I appreciate your concern, but—" "No buts," she interrupted firmly. "You have a separated shoulder, severe bruising, and you've had less than 6 hours of sleep in the past 48 hours. Your body is operating on adrenaline and painkillers, which is not sustainable. What do you suggest? That I hide in a hospital bed while my country is under attack?" "I suggest that you trust your subordinates to handle tactical operations while you focus on the strategic leadership that only you can provide." It was sound advice, and Ibrahim knew it. But he also knew that the upcoming confrontation with Diarra was deeply personal. This wasn't just about national security, it was about betrayal, ideology, and the fundamental question of what kind of future Africa would choose for itself. "Compromise," Ibrahim finally said. "I'll coordinate the operation from a secure command post, but I won't be sitting on the sidelines while others risk their lives for my decisions." Dr. Traoré looked as if she wanted to argue further, but something in Ibrahim's expression warned her that this was not negotiable. "At least let me adjust your medication and check your vital signs before you do anything foolish." As she examined him, checking his pulse and blood pressure, Ibrahim's mind wandered to the broader implications of what they were attempting. If they succeeded in exposing and dismantling Sahel solutions, it would send a message across Africa and around the world that the continent's resources and peoples were no longer available for casual exploitation. But if they failed, the consequences would be catastrophic, not just for him personally, but for the principle of African sovereignty itself. Other leaders would see his fate and conclude that resistance was futile, that cooperation with foreign exploiters was the only path to survival. "Your blood pressure is elevated, but not dangerously so, Doctor," Traoré announced. "Your pulse is steady. Physically, you can handle moderate stress, but I'm concerned about the psychological toll this is taking." "Psychological toll?" "Ibrahim, you've been betrayed by people you trusted, attacked by professional killers, and now you're planning a confrontation with someone who was once a close friend. That kind of emotional trauma can be as debilitating as physical injury." Ibrahim considered this. It was true that the betrayals had shaken him more than he cared to admit. The knowledge that Sergeant Ousmane had spent months planning his assassination, that General Yago had been manipulated into compromising national security, that Diarra had transformed from advisor to enemy. All of it challenged his fundamental assumptions about human nature and loyalty. "What would you recommend?" he asked. "Remember why you're fighting. Not for revenge, not for personal vindication, but for the principles and people you've always served. Don't let anger cloud your judgment or lead you into unnecessary risks." It was wise counsel, and Ibrahim filed it away for later consideration. But as evening approached and the final preparations began for the operation against Diarra, he found himself thinking not about principles or people, but about the moment when he would finally confront the man who had once been his closest advisor and was now his deadliest enemy. The warehouse complex in Ouagadougou's industrial district was a maze of corrugated metal buildings and empty shipping containers, perfect for clandestine meetings and equally perfect for military operations. As darkness fell over the city, Ibrahim positioned himself in a mobile command center 3 blocks away, surrounded by banks of monitors displaying feeds from hidden cameras and listening devices. "All teams in position," reported Captain Zungrana, the leader of the tactical assault unit. "We have visual confirmation of at least 6 individuals in and around the target warehouse. 2 vehicles parked outside. 1 sedan, One SUV with diplomatic plates. Ibrahim leaned forward, studying the grainy surveillance footage. Diplomatic plates? Embassy vehicle from Dubai, Colonel Amadou confirmed. Registered to a cultural attaché who doesn't exist in any official diplomatic database. The use of diplomatic immunity as cover was sophisticated but not unexpected. Sahel Solutions had proven adept at exploiting legal loopholes and international protocols to shield their operations from local law enforcement. Any sign of Diarra? Negative visual confirmation yet, but thermal imaging shows at least one more individual inside the warehouse than we initially counted. Could be our target. At exactly 10:47 p.m., General Yago's military vehicle approached the warehouse complex. Through the surveillance cameras, Ibrahim watched his old friend and potential traitor walk toward what might be his redemption or his doom. Yago moved with the steady gait of a professional soldier, but Ibrahim could see the tension in his shoulders and the way his eyes constantly scanned the shadows. "Remember," Ibrahim spoke into his radio, "Yago is under our protection, but also under suspicion. If this goes wrong, if he betrays us again, consider him a hostile target." It was a harsh directive, but necessary. They couldn't afford to let personal relationships cloud operational judgment. The warehouse door opened, and a figure emerged to greet Yago. Even through the low-resolution surveillance camera, Ibrahim recognized the silhouette immediately. Karamoko. Diarra looked older than Ibrahim remembered, grayer hair, more lines around his eyes, but he still carried himself with the quiet confidence that had once made him such an effective advisor. "Target confirmed," Ibrahim announced. "Karamoko Diarra is on site." The two men disappeared into the warehouse, and for several tense minutes, the only sounds in the command center were the static from radio communications and the hum of electronic equipment. Then Yago's voice came through the concealed microphone he carried. "Appreciate the urgency of the situation. President Traoré has become increasingly paranoid since the attack. He's convinced there are traitors in his inner circle." "And is he correct?" Diarra's voice was exactly as Ibrahim remembered, smooth, cultured, with just a hint of amusement at the follies of lesser men. "Partially. There are certainly security breaches, but I don't think he understands the scope of the challenges facing the region." "Enlighten me." Ibrahim tensed as he listened to Yago's carefully scripted response. They had rehearsed this conversation multiple times, but there was no predicting how Diarra would react or what traps he might spring. "The economic pressures are unsustainable," Yago continued. "Foreign debt, commodity price volatility, demographic pressures. Burkina Faso needs international partnership, not the isolationist policies Ibrahim seems to favor." International partnership? An interesting phrase. There was a pause, and Ibrahim could almost hear Diarra's calculating mind working. "What kind of partnership did you have in mind?" "The kind that recognizes realities. Western corporations have the capital and technology Africa needs for development. African governments have the resources and labor those corporations require. There should be a way to structure relationships that benefit everyone." "Should be. But there are always obstacles. Nationalist politicians, for instance, who prioritize sovereignty over prosperity." "Indeed." Yago's voice was steady, but Ibrahim could hear the underlying tension. "Which brings me to why I requested this meeting." Through the surveillance cameras, Ibrahim watched as Yago reached into his jacket and pulled out what appeared to be a manila folder. But instead of intelligence documents, the folder contained a small electronic device, a GPS locator that would allow the assault teams to track every movement within the warehouse. "I have detailed security protocols for the presidential palace," Yago announced. "Guard rotations, safe room locations, communication procedures, everything your clients would need to plan a more comprehensive solution to the Ibrahim problem." Diarra accepted the folder with the casual air of a man conducting routine business. "Comprehensive solution. I like that terminology. much more professional than assassination. I prefer to think of it as regime change, Yago replied. For the good of the country, of course. Of course. Diarra opened the folder and began scanning its contents. This is quite thorough. Your clients will be very pleased. My clients? Don't play naive, General. You didn't think Sahel Solutions operates independently, did you? We have partners, investors, stakeholders with significant interests in regional stability. Ibrahim felt his blood run cold. The conversation was revealing even more than they had hoped. Confirmation that Sahel Solutions was indeed part of a larger network of corporate and governmental interests. Who are these stakeholders? Yago asked. Diarra chuckled. That's information reserved for a higher level of cooperation. But I will say this. When Ibrahim falls, as he inevitably will, his replacement will find a very lucrative set of development contracts waiting for signature. And if the replacement has moral qualms about such contracts, then the replacement will discover that moral qualms are expensive luxuries that developing nations can't afford. The threat was implicit but unmistakable. Anyone who opposed the network's agenda would face the same fate as Ibrahim: assassination, destabilization, or worse. I think we've heard enough, Ibrahim announced into his radio. All teams, execute Operation Cleansing Wind. What followed was a precisely choreographed assault that demonstrated the superior training and equipment of Ibrahim's special forces. Within 90 seconds, the warehouse was surrounded, all escape routes were blocked, and tactical teams were moving through multiple entry points. Diarra's security team was professional, but outnumbered and outmaneuvered. The brief firefight that erupted was intense but one-sided, ending with 2 mercenaries dead and the rest surrendering. When the smoke cleared, Ibrahim finally entered the warehouse to confront his former advisor face-to-face. Diarra sat calmly, in a metal chair, his hands zip-tied behind his back, a thin line of blood trickling from a cut above his left eye. Despite his circumstances, he looked almost amused as Ibrahim approached. "Hello, Karamoko," Ibrahim said quietly. "Ibrahim, you're looking well for a man who should be dead? Disappointed?" "Professionally, yes. Personally," Diarra shrugged. "I always respected your survival instincts." Ibrahim studied his former advisor's face, looking for any sign of remorse or regret. What he saw instead was the same calculating intelligence that had once served Burkina Faso's interests but had now been turned against it. "Why?" Ibrahim asked. "Why betray everything we worked for?" "Betray?" Diarra looked genuinely surprised. "I haven't betrayed anything. I've simply evolved beyond the limitations of nationalism and ideology. You're working with foreign mercenaries to overthrow African governments. I'm working with international partners to bring stability and prosperity to a region that desperately needs both. The methods may be distasteful, but the ends justify them." Ibrahim felt a familiar surge of anger, but Dr. Caboret's words echoed in his mind. Don't let emotion cloud judgment. This wasn't about personal vindication, it was about principles and the future of his country. "What ends?" Ibrahim asked. "Corporate profits? Resource extraction? The recolonization of Africa under a different flag?" "Development," Diarra replied firmly. "Jobs, infrastructure, technological advancement, everything Africa needs to join the modern world economy." "At what price? Our sovereignty? Our dignity? Our right to determine our own future?" Diarra leaned forward as much as his restraints allowed. "Ibrahim, you're still thinking like a revolutionary. But the revolution is over. You won. Now you have to govern, and governing requires compromise. Not the kind of compromise you're offering. Then you'll fail, and when you do, someone more pragmatic will take your place." The conversation was interrupted by Colonel Amadou approaching, with a tablet displaying preliminary intelligence extracted from the captured mercenaries and their equipment. "Sir, you need to see this," Amadou announced urgently. Ibrahim glanced at the screen and felt his heart stop. It was a detailed organizational chart showing Sahel Solutions network across Africa, complete with names, dates, and operational objectives. But what captured his attention wasn't the scope of the conspiracy. It was the timeline. According to the documents, Operation Cleansing Wind wasn't their code name for tonight's counterintelligence mission. It was Sahel Solutions' code name for a coordinated campaign of assassinations and destabilization efforts scheduled to begin in less than 72 hours. Ibrahim wasn't just hunting his enemies, he was racing against time to prevent a continental catastrophe. Karamoko, Ibrahim said, his voice deadly quiet. I need a complete list of targets and operational details. Everything. Diarra smiled. I'm afraid that information is above my security clearance. I'm just a facilitator, not a decision-maker. Then who is the decision-maker? Someone you'll never find in time to stop what's coming? Ibrahim stared at his former advisor, seeing not just personal betrayal but the embodiment of a philosophy that valued efficiency over justice, profit over principles, and power over people. The conversation had revealed the true scope of the threat facing Africa, but it had also confirmed something equally important. This was a fight worth having. Regardless of the odds, Colonel Amadou, Ibrahim said, never taking his eyes off Diarra. Contact our allies in Mali, Côte d'Ivoire, and Guinea. Share everything we've learned. Operation Cleansing Wind, their version, not ours, begins in 72 hours. And him? Amadou gestured toward the captured advisor. Ibrahim considered the question. Under Burkina Faso law, treason carried the death penalty. Under international law, Diarra's activities constituted war crimes and crimes against humanity. But executing him would make him a martyr and wouldn't advance their larger strategic objectives. Transfer him to maximum security detention. Ibrahim decided. Full isolation, no communications, no visitors. He has information we need, and eventually he'll decide that cooperation is preferable to a lifetime in solitary confinement. As Diarra was led away, he called back over his shoulder. Ibrahim, you're still thinking too small. This isn't about Burkina Faso or even Africa. It's about the global allocation of resources and the inevitability of economic integration. You can't stop history. Watch me, Ibrahim replied. But as he stood in the empty warehouse, surrounded by the evidence of a conspiracy that reached across continents and involved billions of dollars in corporate interests, Ibrahim knew that capturing Diarra was only the beginning. The real war, for the soul of Africa itself, was just getting started. And in 72 hours, that war would explode across the continent with devastating force. 6 months after the confrontation in the warehouse, President Ibrahim Traoré stood on the balcony of the presidential palace, looking out over Ouagadougou as the sun set behind the sprawling cityscape. His shoulder had healed completely, leaving only a small scar as a reminder of how close he had come to death on Avenue Kumasi. The intervening months had been filled with revelations, trials, and the painstaking work of dismantling an international conspiracy that had taken years to construct. Operation Cleansing Wind, Sahel Solutions' version, had been prevented through coordinated intelligence sharing between 5 African nations, resulting in the arrest or elimination of over 200 mercenaries, corrupt officials, and corporate conspirators. General Yago had been quietly retired from active duty but spared prosecution in exchange for his cooperation in the investigation. He now lived on a small farm outside the capital, tending goats and writing memoirs that would never be published. The experience had aged him considerably, but it had also given him a clarity about loyalty and betrayal that he had lacked before. Karamoko Diarra remained in solitary confinement, though he had finally begun providing information about the corporate networks that had funded Sahel Solutions. His cooperation had led to criminal investigations in 6 countries and the freezing of assets worth over $2 billion. But Ibrahim knew better than to celebrate prematurely. Networks like Sahel Solutions didn't die. They evolved. Already intelligence reports were coming in about new organizations, new methods, new attempts to exploit Africa's resources and undermine its sovereignty. "Sir?" Colonel Amadou approached from behind, carrying the evening intelligence briefing. "There's been a development you should see." Ibrahim accepted the folder and scanned its contents. It was a report from their allies in Mali about suspicious activity near the gold mining regions, foreign contractors, unexplained equipment movements, and communications traffic that suggested another destabilization operation might be in the planning stages. "Different name, same game," Ibrahim observed. "It appears so, sir, but we're better prepared now. The intelligence-sharing protocols we established are working, and our counterintelligence capabilities have improved significantly." Ibrahim nodded, but his expression remained troubled. "Colonel, do you ever wonder if we're fighting a war we can't win?" Amadou considered the question seriously. "I think we're fighting a war we can't afford to lose, sir. And there's a difference." It was a profound distinction, and one that captured the essential truth of their situation. Africa's struggle for true independence and self-determination wasn't a battle that could be won once and forgotten. It was an ongoing commitment that would require vigilance, sacrifice, and the constant willingness to confront those who would exploit the continent's resources and peoples. "Any word from our friends in the other capitals?" Ibrahim asked. "President Keita reports similar suspicious activity in Mali. President Ouattara has identified what appears to be a new network of shell companies attempting to acquire mining rights in Côte d'Ivoire. Prime Minister Condé's intelligence services have intercepted communications suggesting that Guinea is being targeted for another destabilization campaign." "So it continues." "Yes, sir. But so do we." Ibrahim closed the folder and looked back out over his city. Somewhere in those twinkling lights were families going about their evening routines, children doing homework, merchants closing their shops, young couples making plans for the future. They had no idea how close they had come to losing everything, and if Ibrahim had succeeded in his mission, they never would. That was the burden of leadership in the modern world, to fight wars that couldn't be publicly acknowledged, to make sacrifices that couldn't be celebrated, to maintain vigilance against threats that most people couldn't imagine. But it was also a privilege. Every child who grew up free, every family that prospered through honest work, every generation that inherited a more just and sovereign nation, all of it justified the risks and sacrifices. "Colonel," Ibrahim said finally, "prepare the usual briefings for our allied partners, and increase our surveillance of all foreign corporate activities in the mining and agricultural sectors." "Yes, sir. And the new security protocols for your personal protection?" Ibrahim smiled grimly. After everything they had learned about the sophistication of modern assassination techniques and the ease with which trusted individuals could be compromised, the security around him had been completely revolutionized. No more single drivers, no more predictable routes, no more assumptions about loyalty or trustworthiness. Maintain them indefinitely, he decided. Power may shield you from bullets, but as we've learned, vigilance is the only real protection against betrayal. As night fell over Burkina Faso, President Ibrahim Traoré returned to his office to review intelligence reports and plan for the challenges that would inevitably come. Somewhere in the shadows of the global economy, new networks were forming. New conspiracies were being planned, and new threats were emerging. But for the first time in years, Africa had leaders who understood the true nature of these threats and were prepared to meet them with unity, intelligence, and unwavering determination. The continent's resources would no longer be casually plundered by foreign interests. Its governments would no longer be destabilized by mercenaries and corrupted officials. The price of freedom, as Ibrahim had learned, was eternal vigilance. But it was a price worth paying, and one he would continue to pay for as long as he drew breath. In a world built on trust, the greatest danger often came not from declared enemies, but from friends who stopped believing in the cause. The shadow within was always the deadliest threat, and the only defense was the light of truth, transparency, and unwavering commitment to the principles that made freedom possible. The war for Africa's soul would continue, fought not in the headlines or on traditional battlefields, but in the quiet corridors of power, the boardrooms of multinational corporations, and the hearts and minds of leaders who would determine whether the continent's vast potential would serve its own people or foreign. Master's President Ibrahim Traoré had chosen his side, and he would stand by that choice regardless of the cost. Because in the end, some things were worth fighting for, worth dying for, and worth living for. And chief among them was the right of every African to determine their own destiny, free from the shadows of exploitation and betrayal. The greatest. Fortress was not built of steel and concrete, but of principles, vigilance, and the unshakable determination to never again allow the shadow within to triumph over the light of freedom. The end author's note. This story, while fictional, draws inspiration from real challenges facing African nations in the 21st century. The struggle between sovereignty and economic integration, the threat of corporate exploitation, and the complexity of modern security challenges are ongoing realities that require constant vigilance and principled leadership. The price of freedom is indeed eternal watchfulness, and the greatest threats often come from within rather than without.